And then suddenly you had, living, breathing workspaces where you enter, and then there's a lot of light, and you really don't see partitions and barriers.
Prefer very playful workspaces if we must, you know.
And I say that as much of as part of that workforce is, I don't think we are looking at work-life balance anymore. I think people who
It's
are managing the space really need to keep engaging people
Hmm.
to build that community. And I think
It has to be Instagrammable or looking pretty.
where you can
So,
just take a nap or meditate
hmm.
or pray or feed your child or have that 10 minutes of rest to unwind with music.
Hello and welcome to Voice of Achievers with me, Yashika. How do modern workplaces communicate the working professional's mindset? We're speaking to Prosenjit Banerjee, who comes with 18 plus years of extensive experience, having worked with brands including CoWrks, WeWork, and urban space consultants, among others. He's passionate about designing and building out sensitive, sustainable spaces that have the ability to make a difference in people's lives. That's a hard one to crack, and we're trying to figure out how he's cracking the code. Well, he also plays the piano and enjoys reading. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. Lovely to be here.
You Prosenjit, in the last couple of years, particularly in the last 7 to 8 years, the concept of co working has seen a significant rise. And in your perspective, what are the key factors that have been driving this shift? And how do you see the future of co working spaces?
Uh, Thank you. That's a great question, and I think that's behind that. I think is a much more interesting story. It's a great story. Uh, I think the world started to change around the early 2000s, uh, and it started with the nature of work being questioned. So you had a rise of the gig economy. Uh, Automation was really kicking in, and technology became much more widespread and easily available. And I think it was the perfect storm. I think you had the mega startups coming in around that time. Uber came in 2009. The markets crashed in 2007, 2008, and I, I think it was this heady cocktail of yeah, world forces, geopolitical shifts that really needed us to rethink the way we were working. And I think that was the start of everybody trying to look for a different solution. So I think the traditional barriers of the way people worked broke down. Companies were no longer hierarchical. You needed different thinking systems. You needed different ways people had to collaborate, and all of that led to, I think, all of us as designers. For us, it's been a continuum, but it's interesting to look back and try and really pinpoint that place where things change. And for me, I think that's when the someone was really stirring the pot, right? And that's
Yeah.
how things changed. So I think that was the advent of the change in the way we looked at work and workplace design. And if you remember older offices, I think all of us have walked into different kinds of offices over the years. They used to be very predictable. You had, maximum a cubicle, or you had a cabin and a meeting room, and these were all ratios set by HR, which really never changed in 5, 10 years. And then suddenly you had, living, breathing workspaces where you enter, and there's a lot of light, and you really don't see partitions and barriers. Everybody's chatting over a cup of coffee, and there are some closed rooms. And I think it answered this need for everybody to be able to work differently during that time. I think that was the advent of co-working or flexible. At its heart, it was just a bunch of guys really needing 5 seats, because startups and companies then used to be like
Yeah.
one person or 5 people, right? So at its heart, it was just people looking for a place to start working without having to lease, without having to look for internet, without having to look for security. So I think the product really answered those challenges in the beginning, that you can just walk in with your computer, with your notebook, and start working, right? And it became a commune. I think inadvertently it also answered a rather existential question of where do we belong, how are we going, do we answer to something greater. So I think those were the early years of co-working, right? And really thinking back over the last even 5 years, I think the pandemic really tested the product. It really tested,
Mm.
whether this was a sustainable solution. And ironically, co-working or flex came out actually stronger than before,
Okay.
because then we realized that it was actually solving another problem of being able to offer people the choice of either coming to office, which was headquarters, or either coming to a place which was close to where they were. So the ability for an employee or a person in the organization to choose, to have that autonomy, was something very, very special. So I think, in a nutshell, those were the kind of starting points of this product, which we call co-working, flex, managed offices. I mean, you'll see a lot of these kind of terminologies being thrown around, but at its heart, I think it's a product which is collaborative in nature.
Mm.
It kind of helps you navigate different modes of working. For example, different teams working together, but not in the same manner every day. And I think that's also changed with the way we do tasks. They are not really, it's not a fixed number of hours that you clock in and clock out. It's more results based, it's more projects driven. And I think people are responding to the autonomy that's being given to them. So in a nutshell, I think that's what has kind of kicked off the need for this product. And I think that's what will keep kind of pushing it to the next level, or to the next version, so to speak.
Yeah, I like that you mentioned how this came out stronger post the pandemic, and I agree with you, because I think it sort of became like a win-win from both ends, the employer and the employee. You didn't really have to have 100 seats. You
Yeah.
could probably have 50, and you could keep them coming in and out, and clearly offering the flexibility to this generation. We spoke about startups, and the startup culture has seen a significant rise just as much. And these are small teams, very niche, small little teams, like you mentioned. Um, Modern generations and the so called Gen Z, they kind of prefer very playful workspaces, if we must, you know. Um, as opposed to, the of course, the traditional ones that you already touched upon. It evolved into no cubicle structures, but yet there was like a manager and the employees and team members. Further to that, there is this startup rise, and there are these playful workspaces offering like an interesting mix of brewing your own coffee right out there, as opposed to the traditional water cooler conversations, so to say. And you have your foosball and
Yeah.
so on and so forth. You have your games. When you're looking at designing modern workplaces, what what do you pick from the mindset of the upcoming generations, or the ones who are going to be the traditional users of the product, so to say? And what are the elements that you put in from a design perspective to ensure it caters to their needs while also keeping the workplace factor alive?
Wow, that's a loaded question. I think I'm not sure if it's Gen Z or millennials. The the jury's out on the timeline shift of when that kind of merges with each other.
Yeah.
But I think what has happened is, I think and I say that as much of as part of that workforce, is I don't think we are looking at work-life balance anymore. I think it's work-life integration, because honestly speaking, I don't think there is this hard stop where you are able to shut off. I don't know if that, I mean, it's debatable whether that's healthy or not, but I think the nature of work, especially the work that we are kind of doing right now, it's a matter of being able to integrate that with your lives, and finding a balance in both, right? So it's not a question of it's a 9 to 5, I go to an office, I shut down my system, and then I come back home and my life, there's a switch. There was a beautiful series on Apple TV called Severance, when uh, people actually lose their memories the minute they walk out of office, and it's like
Hmm.
they never went there. And that's obviously an extreme. But I think the challenge as a designer is to be able to offer this work life integration to the newer generations, because I think offices are as much a part of their social life than home. And if you see the kind of amenities a lot of spaces provide, it's almost like you really don't need to leave. There's laundry, right? So you're able to kind of get your laundry from home. There's pets are allowed, right? So a lot of singles, a lot of young people can't really leave their pets at home. They carry their pets with them at work. For us, it's children, the same thing. uh, so there's healthcare, so there's daycare. A lot of these spaces cater to young mothers, right? I mean, in terms of
Yes.
ensuring there are feeding rooms, there are wellness rooms where they can kind of take a break. So I think as a designer, it's just important to be able to encapsulate all of that, because all of those are real needs. And the challenge is to be able to ensure the seamless transition between work and life, and offer kind of a third place.
Hmm.
We keep calling it as a third place, right? It's not home, it's not work, but it's somewhere where both can coexist, and that's a very tough thing to do. So it's all of the above, right? It's coffee, it's food, it's events, right? So obviously people who are managing the space really need to keep engaging people
Hmm.
to build that community. And I think as a designer, how do we physically give that stickiness is to try and design for all possible permutation combinations. To give you an example,
That's a tough one to crack, huh?
it's a very tough one to crack. And I don't think anybody's got the mix right. I think we're all trying. Some work better than the others, obviously. But this is a beautiful problem to see how it's evolved, right? So post COVID, for us, a lot of metrics changed, right? How much seats do we provide fixed versus how many movable versus the meeting room ratios and densities. All of that changed because, like you said, nobody was really willing to invest in an office where 300 people come together at the same time. It all kind of got distributed into smaller centers, and people realized that, look, we really don't need to come to the same place every single day all together, right? I mean, there are different ways of doing things. But yes, I think as designers, it's important to understand those use cases. We are very passionate about ensuring that it's equitable. So starting from ensuring that spaces also are allow diversity. I mean, that's not just a buzzword, right? For example, they have to be disabled friendly, they have to be able to be accessible by everybody, they have to cater to different identities, right? Gender fluid washrooms, for example. These are really small touches that go a long way in encapsulating the aspirations of the newer generations, because for them it's not even a pretty office space, is it an Instagrammable office space, right? So we actually have to design artwork which allows you to kind of really carve a little bit of space for yourself, because imagine there's 150, 200, 300 employees with different cultural backgrounds, different aspirations, different preferences. How does one space cater to everybody? It can't, right? So we use these strategies to ensure that there's a bit of placemaking, right? Somebody likes the coffee, so they kind of gravitate towards it. Somebody likes the food, so the kind of food and the place that you cater it at becomes incredibly important. Someone really likes a niche or a phone booth, as we call it, where they can kind of shut it, focus, and shut out the world, introverts, as we call it.
I
uh,
was just going to, it's interesting you mentioned the phone booth, and I'll kind of uh, dwell on this a little bit more, because it's an interesting blend, and I've seen certain workspaces where there's of course a boxed space, and on the other spectrum there is a complete, open space,
yeah,
and then somewhere in the center there is also a blended
yeah,
space.
yeah,
So there's
yeah,
a nice eclectic mix, if one must, of all the three kinds, of keeping the out of the box ideas
yeah,
to keeping the, internal to keeping the external ones. And I also like how you mention that it caters to different needs, inclusive
Yeah.
workplaces, if we must, both geographically and physically.
Hmm.
I also would say psychologically and emotionally in that sense.
Yeah.
um, when you're looking at this, and you're looking at this from an aesthetic point of view,
Hmm.
because like you said, it has to be instagrammable or looking pretty,
Yeah.
so to say. When you balance aesthetics with functionality,
Hmm.
how do you strike that balance while you want to appeal to a larger or a wider audience?
I think at its base, aesthetics is a set of principles which you apply over and over and over again, right? I mean, there are ordering principles in design, in visual arts, in any kind of expression that you're doing. And I think as designers, we just try and figure out for that particular solution what is the best way to kind of layer these on. For example, uh, very interesting, color has a really big impact on the way people work, right? So do you choose warmer colors where you know that there are a lot of people who are going to be there for meeting rooms, for example?
Hmm.
For a really small closed space, if you have really dark, angry, can I use the word angry colors like reds and violets and purples, it's instinctively puts the mood to that kind of level. So what we try and do is in spaces where you know that there's going to be gathering, you try and kind of mellow it down to a place where it allows for different people to kind of come together at their pace and their time. Again, when you focus, it has to be toned down. But the places where you want people to be able to communicate, to be able to chat over a cup of coffee, are the bright ones where people will naturally gravitate to without really having to think about the task. Again, really small principles, but I think over time we've realized that there are certain things that really work well. You really mark out spots on the kind of within the space where you know that people will naturally gravitate to, whether it's a beautiful view, whether it's a place where, like you said, the coffee machine is there where everybody comes and picks up a coffee. How do you make that more attractive? And where you really need people to focus, how do you help them kind of get into the zone, visually kind of isolated, physically isolated? So I think at an ordering principle, as designers, you use that. Um, a lot of multifunctional furniture, for example, and I think this is where technology and engineering has really, really, really on its off come out with so many solutions, right? I mean, you have collapsible pods where if all your meeting rooms are kind of occupied, you can just set them up in an open space and have a focused meeting without noise kind of coming in, right? And then you can fold it and keep it somewhere else. um, Desks which are height adjustable, right? You want to stand and work, you want to sit and work. We've got cycle chairs as well, so where you can actually sit and
Wow,
yeah, yeah,
that's interesting.
yeah, and you keep cycling, and I'm sure you would have seen a lot of movies and serials where people are walking on a treadmill, so they have treadmills in their offices as well. So I think it's a mix of all of these kit of parts to try and see a solution which honestly will work for a large portion of people coming in, right? There's obviously, you can't design for everybody.
For everyone,
Yeah,
yeah.
but you can design for the highest common denominator, which is what we are trying to do, and then give enough space for the people who really, really need to kind of blend into that particular space. So I think at its outset, it's just juggling those parameters, right? Lighting is one. Biophilia is incredibly important. I think that's something that I'm super passionate about. There's so much of research on the ability of indoor plants to be able to really, really filter out a lot of toxins, because anyways we're breathing canned air, and no matter how wonderful the air conditioning is, something or the other will seep through, and this is just another beautiful natural layer of being able to kind of filter that out. Psychologically, biophilia is wonderful, right? We all know that the brain kind of functions very differently when looking at natural greens. So all of that comes into play. um, focus spaces with white noise. Very interesting. There was a study of neurodivergent people who, with white noise and a focus space really helped people with a lot of anxiety and a lot of mood disorders to be able to kind of bunker down and work. So just giving these kind of options, or having the ability to take these calls in these multifunctional spaces, I think is at the heart of any kind of flexible design. And like you said, it's a tough thing to do, and then some centers we get it right, some designs we get it right, some we learn. And I think it's fascinating with the amount of variables that we deal with. It's just
It's as fascinating to know what kind of research might be going behind this. I mean, in terms of turnaround time, say, you're looking at designing a modern workspace, and you're looking at, say, a tier one. Maybe let's talk about a tier two city, for example. I'm sure that also
yeah,
sort of brings in a different
cultural
dimension
sensitivity.
into
Yeah,
it.
absolutely.
So, what kind of research goes into putting this work together and then actually saying that yes, this is what the design would look like?
That's that's a that's an opportunity. I think, I don't think that there is a lot of structured design into data from workplaces, and I think that that's a fantastic opportunity for us as designers and engineers to be able to kind of build into the workplaces to gather insights. I mean, there are researches at a real estate level which talks about absorption percentages and the way people work. A lot of companies do this. But honestly speaking, I think the best sources of data are the workplaces themselves. And I think with technology now, there is an enormous opportunity to be able to gather real time data to see actually how people are using the space. And for me, I think that's the dream, to be able to understand that real time, integrate it into newer models, and see how that changes. But yes, it's an opportunity. I don't think we are using as much data as an industry, as much data as we would want to. That's something that there is a definite opportunity there.
Let's put it this way. Have you walked into a space that was designed by you and your team, and silently observed that this is working and maybe this is not?
Yeah, a lot of times. A lot
Well,
of
then that's data.
Yes.
Very qualitative, but that's data.
Yes, it's anecdotal. I think data is also kind of relative to when and how and where you're observing it, rather
Right.
than there being a continuous stream from where you can draw kind of inferences. But yes, I think as designers, we always do that, right? I mean, that's pretty much the only thing, that the power to observe and see whether something is working or not, and it's behavioral at the end of the day.
Hmm.
Um, we used to design, I'm just giving an anecdote, we used to design seating around staircases, and we realized that that's incredibly uncomfortable. Nobody uses seats right next to a staircase, because anybody who's going up and down is able to kind of see and look at what that person is doing, or eating or talking or speaking. And we stopped doing that. So I mean, those kind of data are crucial and critical. But I think the finer data, for example, are the phone booths really in the right place? Are people
Hmm.
actually discovering it by accident? Or are they needing wayfinding to go ahead and tell them that this is where the phone booth is? Is there a clear line of sight? Yes, as a designer, you would probably kind of be able to predict it. But people behave differently, right, from what you
Yeah.
predict. So I think those will be really, really interesting to see. I know, I mean, there are a lot of companies that are doing that, but I think that is a big opportunity currently, to be able to look at that and mine it for insights. That's the dream.
Yeah. And let's talk about the present. Let's talk about today. And given your experience in the industry, would you say that these are the two things that are um, a modern workplaces needs fulfilled? Meaning, I would definitely put these two elements in a modern workspace design.
Oh, that's a tough one. There's so many. uh, I would say flexible models of seating.
Hmm.
I think the ability to shift between being able to work in a cafeteria with people within your own desk where you know that it's your drawer and your kind of things on it, to a phone booth, to a meeting room, right? So the ability to kind of have flexible spaces truly is one. And I think nowadays it's technology. I think the ability to walk into a meeting room just with your device and connect on a video conference without having any kind of other paraphernalia, I think is a given. The amount of technology that we are using in our workplaces is, I think, exponentially kind of increasing, and I think those are non-negotiables. So whether that's, the latest firewalls, or whether that's the best kind of or the fastest Wi-Fi, or the ability to kind of have your own SSID, so that aspect of technology in workplaces is non-negotiable now. I think
Yeah.
at a flex level, um, especially, and also I think just the power of choice. If we are not able to kind of create these multiple work areas, or multiple focus areas, or multiple places where people can work differently, those are non-negotiable, in my opinion.
Another non-negotiable that we actually spoke about very briefly was, you mentioned the use of plants. And when we're talking about, and I know that you're passionate about this, uh, as someone so passionate about design and about sustainability, how do you incorporate sustainability and wellness into your designs? um, and of course, we are talking about the generation that, like we said, that there aren't any barriers as such between the work and life, so to say. So, how do you make that a complete package with the added elements of sustainability and wellness?
I mean, considering the amount of time people are spending in workplaces now, I think that's exponentially increasing as years go by. The biggest thing that I try and look at, or I think we as designers try and look at, is obviously the material and physical well-being, right? Whether the right lighting level exists, is it the right lighting temperature? I mean, there are a lot of times that we don't get the task light temperature correct. Um, and by light temperature, I mean the color. Is it really yellow? Is it white? Is it super white? So those considerations are important because people will be spending well in excess of about an average of about 9 to 10 hours a day. Um, so just getting the basics right: air, light, having the right levels, having the right amount of circulation, having the right amount of air exchange, and basic sustainability principles. Natural light is an incredibly important aspect of the way we design, or how we design. So,
Nice. Wonderful.
uh,
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, and I remember this was a beautiful lesson that we learned early, where I don't know if you remember the offices, or old offices, where all the cabins would be near the glass, because the
Hmm.
managers and the MDs would be in the cabins, and the
Hmm. Hmm.
guys who would be spending the most amount of time would be in the center. It's almost like a prison with the cabins around and everybody looking at them working. And it's so beautiful to see that change now. It's almost inverted, right? Where you have your closed spaces on the inside, and everybody being kind of pushed towards the edge to be able to ensure that there is enough light and views out. Um, and I think those are important principles, just to ensure that that kind of permeates as much as possible. So natural light is super important. Biophilia we spoke about. Uh, Waste reduction is another important thing. I think operationally, to try and ensure that, the basics, right? We don't use plastic. We recycle. Not only recycle, we segregate at source. A lot of offices don't do that, right? Dry and wet waste is collected together. So segregating at source is important. Um,
You
and
add that to the design element?
Yeah,
I
absolutely.
mean,
So you have to provide spaces, and you have to provide provisions for waste to be collected separately, which is dry waste, glass, recyclable metals, and
wonderful.
they get stored and then obviously taken out in the right manner at source, rather than actually having to go through any other uh, third party. And I think just providing certain non-negotiable spaces like wellness spaces, right? I mean, I know there's always this pressure on real estate to be able to provide a room where you can just take a nap, or meditate,
Hmm.
or pray, or feed your child, or have that 10 minutes of rest to unwind with music. But just to ensure that there is enough space and opportunity for people to do that within the workplace is again important. Put that in. And games and recreation, like you said, I think those are really, really incredibly important aspects of, have making that third place. So people are able to use these for as long as possible in the most sustainable manner as possible. And
Yeah.
basic green design principles, right? I mean, obviously using the right amount of recyclable materials. I mean, those are the easier fixes, right? I mean, you use, because those are in your control. You use the right kind of glues, paints, low VOCs. I mean, we have this laundry list that we follow, which ensures that the kind of space is sustainable. But again, honestly, I think flex or co-working is the most sustainable solution because you're already occupying a built structure. You're not building fresh. And in that way, somebody said, and I think that's a beautiful quote, that the most sustainable building is the one already built, right? So it's not like you're going ahead and building and you're piling on more embodied carbon uh, into the environment, but it's just that you're reusing a lot of real estate infrastructure which would either be idle or which would be demolished and built afresh. So I think all of this works well for the product and with the product. uh, and again, I think with technology, with the ability to kind of monitor, with the ability to hopefully tech goes a long way in for us to be able to also physically change space without too much of breaking and uh, discomfort to the end user. I think that's the next step to be able to make it truly next level.
Talking of next steps, when we're talking about the future of designing workspaces, what do you think are, let's say, just one thing that will be essential for modern workplace designers to keep in mind? This is definitely a non-negotiable.
I would say just hybrid models right now because of the way we are working, right? Again, and maybe that's so much of a design thing, but I see a massive opportunity in being able to leverage the so-called virtual with the physical right now. I know that there's some way to go with the metaverse and with virtual reality, but I think being able to layer that onto these flex spaces, I don't know if it's going to be in terms of technology where meeting rooms are able to support a much larger virtual kind of meeting place, or the whole space is, you can kind of replicate that whole space virtually somewhere, so you cut down the need for the same replication of physical models. But I think just at a larger theme, technology is non-negotiable. I think that needs to kind of keep catching up to the physical space. And I think that the best of that blend is yet to come. I mean, there's so much of work happening with the metaverse, with AI, with quantum computing, for example, that kind of exponentially raises the way you are able to solution for a lot of products that need firepower. That's exciting for me. I want to really see how that kind of turns out. And like I said, I think spaces which are able to be reactive, where with data flowing in, we are able to make quick decisions on spaces that become more sustainable. For example, how do you expand and contract that space basis need, which makes sense at a real estate level, which makes sense at an operational level as well. For example, you don't need half the square footage you're occupying. Is there a way to sustainably kind of pull back, get your partitions out quickly, get people moved out quickly, and release that space, and vice versa? If you really need to grow, what is the way to be able to do that? So I think that flexibility, technology, and just the focus on sustainability and well-being are non-negotiables. They'll be the pillars of flex or co-working going forward.
And what does achievement mean to you?
Wow, that's the toughest question. I would love to quote my 9-year-old who very simply said, achievement is doing what you thought of in the manner that you had dreamt of. Um, and I
How
don't,
and how befitting is that for you? I mean, for the work that you do.
yeah, I think for me personally, achievement is, I think I've been lucky to be at the right place at the right time a lot of times in my life, and I've had a lot of people believing in me when I didn't myself, uh, which is fantastic. So I think that's an achievement to be able to pay back that belief in the work and in the things that I'm doing. At a personal level, I think it's just that being able to kind of constantly reach where I am wanting to in the manner that I want to, in the manner that I need to do it. I don't know if that makes sense.
No, but of course it does. And thank you for this wonderful conversation and giving us a deep dive into what goes into the minds of the modern workplace designer. Thank you so much for chatting with us. Can't be more thankful, Prasenjit.
Thank
Thank
you
you.
so much, Yashika. Pleasure, pleasure. My pleasure.